Welcome to Logos Bible class for 1st through 4th grade. Glad you're here today. We're going to be studying about Abraham, and you have a sheet in the orange folder that looks like this. It has a picture of Abraham, and there's some questions that you can answer after I finish the lesson. You can do those on your own at home. Well, the story of Abraham is found in the book of Genesis, starting at chapter 12. And it's a very interesting story about a Bible hero. When I think about Abraham, I think about the word faith, because Abraham showed a lot of faith in God and what God asked him to do several times. Abraham was given a wonderful promise to be the father of many, many descendants. And descendants are people who come after you, who your children, your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren. And God gave him this promise that he would have as many descendants as there were stars in the sky and grains of sand on the seashore. That's a lot of descendants. So we're going to talk about that and a lot of other neat parts about the Abraham story. When God first starts talking to Abraham, he told him he wanted Abraham to move from the town he was living in that was called Ur, U-R, and he was to move to a new place, and Abraham did it. He trusted God, and he left Ur with his family and their goats and camels and children and just lots of belongings, and they started on the journey to where God was leading them. Well, I'm going to show you a few pictures and talk about the story of Abraham. This is Abraham and his wife Sarah, and God told them to leave Ur and go to a new land. And while they were on the journey is when God spoke to Abraham and said, I am going to make you the father of all these children. And he would have many descendants. Abraham said, but I don't even have a child. And he was old. He was very old. And God said, I'm going to bless you with a child, even in your old age. So one day, and they lived in a tent along the way, and Abraham and Sarah were sitting in the tent, and these three men came along. And they weren't just ordinary men, and Abraham recognized that they were different. But he said, don't go away. Come in my tent and let me wash your feet. And he was going to get some food for him too. So they prepared some food for the guests. And the guests said, your wife Sarah is going to have a baby. Abraham was, they were surprised, and it said that Sarah laughed at it because she was old. And it said the strangers heard her laughing and said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Doesn't she know that God can do anything, however hard it is? Well, a little while later, they did have a little son, and they named him Isaac. And they were so excited to have this little boy. And this is Sarah and Isaac and Abraham. And they were very old when he was born. Well, one day, God told Abraham to do something very unusual and very alarming. He said, I want you to go and sacrifice Isaac. He told him to go to a mountain and to give Isaac back to God. Well, Abraham had known about sacrifice during his journeys, and it was an act of obedience to God. So he was probably very confused and worried to give up the son that was going to make him a grandfather one day and a great grandfather. But he obeyed God, and he went on the trip with Isaac, and they went up on the mountain. And Isaac said, "Where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" And Abraham said something really neat. He said, God will provide the lamb. And he did. And God provided a lamb, and Abraham didn't have to sacrifice Isaac, but God knew that he trusted him completely, and God was very pleased with Abraham. And so he said that there was in the thicket, there was a ram, in this bush, and he provided that for the sacrifice, and God was so pleased with Abraham's faith and with his obedience. Well, there's a couple verses that I think are so important to remember about Abraham. This one is in Hebrews, which is in the New Testament. So we hear about Abraham again many times in the New Testament. And this says, to have faith is to be sure of the things hoped for, to be certain of the things we cannot see. Abraham had to have a lot of faith to leave his town where he was living and obey God and travel to a new place. That was a lot of faith. And the other one, it's in the same chapter in Hebrews. In verse 8 it says, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he set out not knowing where he was going. Amen. Welcome to Logos Bible class.